to the Lightning Hour, an inspirational energy drink for your mind. 3 hosts, 3 actors, 3 friends, 3 perspectives, and fantastic guests every Friday at noon. I'm your host, Sasha Kerbel.
I'm your host, Rachelle Henry.
And I'm your host, Rico E Anderson.
Prepare yourself for high voltage conversation.
And get ready to supercharge your brain.
Because it's time for the Lightning Hour! And let's meet our guest. We have writer, producer, director, actor, and animator, Frank Dietz.
Frank Dietz started out as an actor, starring in a series of now-cult horror films like Zombie Nightmare and Black Roses. As a writer, he wrote the scripts for many independent features, including Naked Souls, Cold Harvest, and the Magic in the Mirror series for Paramount.
Frank has worked as an animation artist at Walt Disney Studios on such films as Hercules, Mulan, Tarzan, Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and most recently, Mary Poppins Returns. For 2 years in a row, Frank has been awarded the very first Rondo Hatton Classic Horror Awards as Artist of the Year.
Frank has produced 2 documentaries. Both have won multiple Best Documentary Festival awards. Also, together with Dread of Night creator Scott Wheats, he's also a part of the Damn Dirty Geeks podcast, where they have guests like Walking Dead's Greg Nicotero and comedian Dana Gould.
Last year saw the release of the comedy feature written by Frank and Todd Traina, I Hate Kids, with Tom Everett Scott, Rico E Anderson, Titus Burgess, and Marisa Tomei.
Frank is currently writer on the AMC Shudder television series Creepshow.
Don't just stand there.
Wow.
I have to be at UCLA in 1 hour to give my speech on women's empowerment in the social media arena. The helicopter will be here in 5 minutes. How fast can you tweet?
Huh? I don't know.
Strike 2. If you want this job, you better pick up the pace. I require someone who can manage my schedule, count my calories, feed my geckos, and make sure I don't wear the same dress twice. If you last 2 weeks, I'll double your salary, okay?
I'm not here for the job, Christine.
Who are you?
It's me, Nick Pearson.
Nick. Oh. I didn't recognize you, Nick. Oh, you didn't age well. You're not on my schedule.
I know. I called you an hour ago, remember?
This is why I need an assistant. I think I can fit you in on Thursday.
No, I gotta talk to you right now. It's important.
Okay, you have 35 seconds. Go.
Okay. Did you and I have a child that you secretly gave up for adoption, by any chance?
Why would you ask me that?
Because this kid out here deserves to know who his mother is.
Oh, he's awfully big. Does baldness run in your family?
Not him, the other one.
Nick, for someone who writes comedy, you really can't take a joke, can you?
I'm all off my game.
Sorry, Nick. I can't help you. Wasn't me. Tell the kid I'm sorry.
Sorry to bother you.
Hey, Nick. For whatever it's worth, I can't have kids. You would have found that out if you'd stuck around. I built my empire instead. Everything happens for a reason. Bye. Good luck.
Another dead end?
Yep. You really flushed that golden ticket down the commode.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest, Frank Dietz.
Woo! Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Hi.
Howdy.
How are you?
Good. Oh, I mean, that's a relative term these days with the world being what it is, but good.
Thank you so much for being on the show. We're so happy to have you.
Oh, thanks. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well,
Indeed.
first of all, congratulations, Frank. You're currently a writer on the season 2 of the reboot of the popular series Creepshow. And this time, the keys to the franchise has been given to the Walking Dead, Greg Nicotero. How cool is that? And what can people expect from this upcoming season?
Greg and I, first of all, have been friends for, 25 years or more at this point, way before The Walking Dead. And he's a great guy. And we bonded because of our love for the genre. And we grew up, we're close to the same age, so we grew up watching the same TV shows and movies. And Creepshow was important to Greg because of his alliance with George Romero and Tom Savini. So for him to acquire the rights to Creepshow was a big deal. And, you know, I got excited about it immediately. And immediately I started, actually not immediately, because I didn't work on season 1 at all. And, but when the minute they got renewed, I sat down and I literally wrote an episode in 2 days and sent it to Greg. And thankfully he liked it. And then he had to send it to the network, the execs, because they had to approve it, even though Greg's the showrunner. There were always higher ups, right? You know, for AMC basically, because AMC owns Shudder. But I think that what you're going to see in season 2, aside from Easter eggs, because Greg loves that stuff. He's been putting Easter eggs in The Walking Dead for a decade now. You know, a zombie from some other movie will pop up, you know, in the crowd, right? For season 2 of Creepshow, I think you're going to see a lot more monstery kinds of things, bigger kind of creatures and so forth. And I think there's going to be a lot of focus on the not so much psychological stuff, right? But physical stuff. Like it's no secret that in my episode there is a gigantic tarantula, like the size of a couch, which Greg, I can say that because Greg actually put it out there in a part of a press release, a little video of the spider moving around a little bit. The spider was incredible. Like they were still working on it when I went over to K&B, and Adam Doherty is this marvelous sculptor. He's known as the Creature Kid, but he was working on the spider when I went there, and it isn't the spider isn't the only gigantic animal in that episode, and that's the beauty of Greg being the one who's the showrunner on Creepshow, because Greg, of course, is the N in K&B Effects, and you know, so he and Howard Berger own this gigantic shop out here in LA, and they've worked on so many shows and so many movies, and Chronicles of Narnia and all of Quentin Tarantino's movies and so forth. I mean, they are legends at this point. So for Greg to be showrunner on a show like Creepshow is wonderful, because he knows what he can create utilizing the team that he's been working with for 30 years.
Right. I mean, and that's incredible, because the original Creepshow was released in 1984, and it was based on popular comic books from the 50s, which, of course, like you were mentioning, growing up watching the show, being fans of the show. And I was wondering, what is the production and writing process of bringing back this nostalgic show while trying to give it an appeal to a modern audience? How has the fan response been so far from both the original fans and the new viewers?
Mostly very good. I mean, the response has been excellent, because otherwise it would not have been picked up for season 2. There were some people that were, unsatisfied, but that's going to happen with any show. Mostly very pleased. I loved it. There were a few episodes in particular that just really, I just thought were spectacular. The Monkey's Paw, or Night of the Paw, I guess it was called, with Bruce Davidson, was great. The Finger was written by my dear friend David J. Scow, and that's one of the most popular episodes from last season. But they're upping the ante, I think, for season 2. A little bigger, and I think also. I'm not positive about this, because unfortunately, because of COVID, I wasn't able to go to the set. Which was originally my plan. We shut down. It was 2 days before they were going to start shooting down in Atlanta, and I had my flight. I was all set to go stay down there with Greg and watch them shoot, my episode, and everything came to a grinding halt, as we all know. But luckily they are back in production. They've already shot my episode. Compared to like audiences then and audiences now, I think that one of the shows that Greg and I both loved, and it was the first thing that I mentioned when Greg told me he thought he was getting the rights to Creepshow, was Rod Serling's Night Gallery. And what we loved about that show was that it was an anthology and that you had several different segments in each episode. And you know, with Night Gallery, they would really mix it up. Some of them would be longer, some of them would be very scary, some of them would be silly, like short, tiny little short 5-minute ones. But it was nice. You got this nice variety of stuff. And so I think that in a lot of ways, you know, Greg is getting to recreate Creepshow, Night Gallery, all the Tales from the Crypt, all the kinds of shows, the anthology shows that we loved. And I think that you know, that if you're into horror, chances are you're gonna enjoy something like that. I know I certainly do.
Well, Frank, I know you've been bitten by many bugs, especially. But I think it's awesome, man, because, you know, you mentioned writing earlier, and there's a poster that is right behind you that has very significance to it for a lot of different reasons. It's the feature that you wrote called I Hate Kids. You wrote that along with Todd Traina and directed by John Asher. And the film stars Tom Everett Scott, Titus Burgess, Ray Seahorn, Julianne Emery, Rachel Boston, Marissa Tomei, and I do a little
somebody else.
Yeah. I rock a little cameo as a CHP.
Yes, you do. You have a terrific scene, actually. That was our second day of shooting. I remember we were down on the Pacific Coast Highway, right?
We shut it down.
Right, yeah, we did actually.
Shut it during rush hour. I mean, a little close to rush hour, but as soon as rush hour hit, we made a lot of enemies that day.
Yeah, they weren't happy because we had to do we had to hook up a car to the camera rig, and drive it along, PCH, and nobody likes that.
No.
You know, even the people who work in the business are like, oh crap, we're stuck behind a camera rig.
And you couldn't have done it at like 5 in the morning when there's less cars and things like that.
No, it was a beautiful. It needed to really be like this beautiful day.
Right.
To really fit in the tone of the picture, I think.
The right light.
And it was, in fact, it was a little too beautiful because. Do you remember? I don't know if you remember. By the end of that day, what I looked like, I was not reapplying sunscreen.
You were red.
I was red as a lobster, and I didn't even know it until we were almost finished. And I remember Todd Traina like looking at me and going, "You might want to put more sunscreen on." But the next day, oh my God, I was just beet red, and I got from the wind and the salt in the air, I got what they call fisherman's eye. So I had this like big bright red spot in the white of my eye. Oh, great. Here's some, like my great photos of everybody with the, on the set with this like Quasimodo eye hanging. And believe me, I just was like, I didn't want to be like all flaking like a lizard, shedding his skin while we're shooting this thing. And because that whole experience was so joyous and it was better than I could have possibly imagined. But
it was a great time, man. It was one day on set for myself, but just the overall atmosphere.
There was good humor throughout.
It really was.
We couldn't have cast nicer people. I had not met any of them before. I knew Ray Seahorn just from watching Better Call Saul. And when Todd said that she was going to be in it, I was so thrilled. I was so happy. And I'm still friends with Tom Everett Scott. I'm still friends with Ray Seahorn, Rachel Boston, pretty much all of the leads. And not so much Titus, because Titus he's sort of in a different sphere.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a great experience. It was a great experience.
What's the movie about? Tell our audience what I Hate Kids about.
I Hate Kids is about a a longtime bachelor who's met the woman of his dreams, and they're going to get married. And there's one thing that they share in particular, which is that neither of them are interested in having children. That's sort of the basis of their relationship probably started from there. What happens is at the rehearsal dinner before the wedding, 2 days or 3 days before the wedding, 13-year-old boy shows up out of nowhere and basically says to Tom, "You're my dad." And what it becomes is he doesn't want his fiance to believe that this kid is really his. And so he's on a mission to find out who the mother is, because he dated a lot of ladies 13 years ago. And so there's a certain group of them that it could be any one of these people.
The comedy ensues.
I remember the big box.
Yes,
Yeah,
the big box of letters.
I have to add something here, that the kid was adopted when he
Yes.
was little. That's why we don't know who the mom is.
Right. He was in foster homes, basically.
And it's such an interesting twist, because a lot of time you'll see stories of who's my dad, or, who's my father, that type of thing. How did you come up with this particular?
The initial concept was Todd's. He had this picture of it actually happening at the wedding itself during the ceremony, that this kid would come out of nowhere and be like, "You're my father." But then what we had to figure out was, how did he find out that this was his father? And how does he not know who the mother is? Those were the challenges. And so there was a lot of, as with any script, you go through a lot of different ideas and there's different drafts. The original draft of I Hate Kids was called Without a Hitch. And it was very different from what we ended up making. Very different. It started out, actually, Todd and I were in a bar up in Napa Valley, and we were having drinks, and we were up there actually working on several different scripts. And we'd laughed about this real life psychic named Gary Spivey, who is a very flamboyant character. And he's like a psychic to the stars. Like he's Joan Collins, psychic, or whatever, like people like Liza Minnelli, people like that. And he's just hilarious because he's this very big character. He's got this gigantic white afro, and he wears these big blousy, fluffy, shirts. He's just very weird, right? But people love him. And so we thought, wouldn't it be funny if the kid finds out who his dad is through a flamboyant psychic? And that sends them on the road trip, the three of them, to find the mom, right? And of course, Tom's character and the psychic don't get along at all. And Tom isn't even that enamored with his son, right? Because they're very different. But in the course, in the end, it turns out they're really not. But then there was still the challenge of, how does he prove that it's the dad? I came up with this crazy idea that because Tom's character was sort of a celebrity, that his barber was taking the clips from his hair and selling them on eBay. And so the kid wins an auction of the guy's hair after the psychic has told him that's your dad. And he has it tested, and the DNA comes back as positive. So we shot this whole crazy sequence where they show the barber sweeping up the hair, putting it on him winning, the kid winning the auction. And then there it's like, so now how do we find the mom? And
Definitely, there's definitely, you put in a good variety of that. There were so many different potential women that could have been the mother.
Yeah.
And there was there was a few surprising ones in there, which, kept it interesting. So it wasn't, they weren't very similar, which made the whole list of okay, who's my mom? Yeah. All these different options. Who is the mom?
Yeah. And having to come up with, individual personalities for each one of these people, each one of these potential mothers, and make sure that they each had their own silhouette, if you will. They're very distinguishable between each other. And a lot of those went through changes also, because it's also what happens in the course of as you go through drafts and in fact, Arden Marine, who's so funny in her scene she's got a house full of mannequins and has a mannequin dressed up as a little Tom Everett Scott. That scene was originally supposed to be, she was a cat lady. She had 100 cats in her house. And we changed it. John Asher actually changed it from the cat lady to the mannequin lady because he, myself, and Titus are all terribly allergic to cats. And we were thinking like, oh boy, that's going to be, and plus it had its challenges. If you have animals on set, we could only have so many of them. And originally we thought, oh, we'll, put digital ones, in later. But in the end, the mannequin people were creepy enough as it was. And nobody plays crazy like Arden Marine. She's too much. And Marissa Tomei's scene, that was different. There was a different scene, but I wrote that scene specifically for Marissa only 3 or 4 days before we started making the movie. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, not just because Marissa's in it, obviously, but I like the way it plays out.
You celebrated another very successful project that was released around the same time, and not as a writer, but as an animator on the sequel to Disney's Mary Poppins, titled Mary Poppins Returns.
Yeah.
The specific type of animation you primarily work on is as a cleanup artist. With that, you also worked on Disney hits Hercules, Mulan, Tarzan, and Atlantis: The Lost Empire. And so how long have you been a part of the Disney family? And could you explain to our audience what a cleanup artist does that regular animators don't?
Mm-hmm.
Out of the way! Two for flinching. See ya, Milo. Milo.
So the way it works is the animator's the actor. Okay, so he's going to create these very rough drawings. What they're establishing is what the action is, what the character is doing, how if he's moving his head, if he's, jumping up and down, whatever it is. They have a character that they are assigned to, that they will work on that one character. And there'll be a team of them. There'll be a lead guy, and then there'll be a team under him that follow through with what the lead animator does. So then they'll shoot that, they'll make sure it works right, that the animation is working correctly. And once they're satisfied with it, it then gets moved to the cleanup animators. So what we are, if the rough animators are the actors, the cleanup animators are the costumers, I guess you could say, because what we then have to do is take those rough drawings and literally clean them up, meaning that we will create nice, perfect lines, right? And all the while trying to plus the animation to make sure that it's working the way the animator intended, right? So it's hard work, and it's sometimes very stressful, and it could knock you out sometimes, especially if you're in what we call crunch of a movie, which is like the last 2 months when we have to finish it, because these movies have very strict release dates. The music and all that will have to be done before the movie can be finished. So we're on a very tight schedule, but we have to make sure that that character is what we call on model, number one, because the rough animators, they're more concerned with making sure that the animation works. They're not that concerned with getting maybe the size of the nose exactly right. And sometimes they do, but a lot of the time, that's our job, to make sure that that character looks the same from the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie. And so we'd have a team, for example, on Tarzan. I was assigned character of Kala, who is Tarzan's adopted gorilla mother. And there was me and I think it was around 7 other people. And we were dedicated to that character. And all of us would clean up Kala for the entire movie and make sure that she was on model and that she looked the way she's supposed to. Sometimes in the earlier Disney movies, characters aren't always on model. Little Mermaid, there are times when Ariel, I think, looks very different from scene to scene, but they became real sticklers for it. And that was part of our job. That's why we were trained to be professionals, to do this exactly the way it needed to be done. When the opportunity came up, my wife was working over there at Disney. Back then, she was helping voice cast the movies that were coming up and so forth. And she'd been working there only a few weeks, months even. And she called me up at home one day and she was like, you could do this. Like, you could get a job here if you wanted to. But I didn't know anything I didn't know what cleanup animation was, right? When somebody once said to me, it was like, oh, maybe you'd like to do, clean up over at the studio over here. And it was just like, I don't know. Janitorial work was just never really in my thing. But, but I basically had to then go on a crash course. I had to learn about animation, which I loved. I was a huge Bugs Bunny fan. The opening titles of my favorite movie, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, is a whole animated sequence that nobody really knows who did it back then. It's been a mystery for years. But I didn't know how it worked. So I went to the union, the Animators Union, and started taking classes there. And really was just taking every class I could to find out. And I took a Cleanup 101 class, because that seemed to be the place I'd be able to get into. And then I had to submit a portfolio. They were already working on Hercules, but they were behind schedule. There was still a lot of work to be done, especially because one of the voices changed. One of the major characters changed actors. So that had to all be redone from the stuff they had already done and so forth. So I submitted a portfolio. Luckily, I knew ahead of time, and most people don't know this. This is the biggest, if you want to call it a rookie move, that people who want to get into animation at the studios don't understand. And that is, the studio doesn't want to see a portfolio filled with drawings of Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and Goofy. They want to see that you could draw. They want to see life drawing. They want to see gesture drawing. They want to see drawings that you did at the zoo of animals. They want to see that you can draw, that you understand, have some idea of anatomy and volume and so forth. That's how you get in, not by drawing cartoon characters. They would not even consider it. They would need to see these things, especially life drawing, because you learn more from life drawing than any other way of learning to draw.
That's so cool. And you mentioned being rebellious and wanting to be an actor. And you have worked as an actor. You starred in a series of horror films that are now, cult classics, like Zombie Nightmare with Adam West. And this film had an unusual resurgence with Mystery Science Theater 3000 when they got a hold of it and started riffing about it, which got it into even more of a cult status. Did you ever think that anything like that would ever happen? And
no, not at all. Because we realized pretty quickly on that the director of Zombie Nightmare was not Cecil B. DeMille. We just knew this wasn't going to come out the way we pictured it. We had all the correct crew there. We were shooting it the way it should be shot. And it was my first movie. So I was taking everything in. I was learning. I was just like, that was the first time I had been on a set since King of Comedy, which was 10 years or so earlier. So I was thrilled, and to the idea of working with my childhood hero. If you told 7-year-old me that one day I was going to be in a movie opposite working with Adam West, mind blown. I couldn't even have imagined. But we knew that it was not going to be what we really hoped it would be. Me and John Fasano, who actually wrote the script. He didn't get credit because we were shooting in Canada, and there were certain jobs that had to go to Canadians officially. And John wrote it, and it was a lot more interesting than what we shot. The idea was that Tony, the kid who becomes the zombie, and his family were all supposed to be Black, and the kids were supposed to be these white, snotty, bratty, kids, entitled kids, right? That was interesting to me because it showed the divide between these two cultures that all were living in this same town. And the way John wrote it, it was really, it was far more interesting than it ended up being when Jack decided to change the ethnicities of people. And it's kind of funny. And one of the things that they picked up on Mystery Science Theater is that some lines don't make sense because they're still referring to a racial difference that doesn't exist. I think Tia Carrera has a line where she says, she's talking about the kid they ran over, and she says something like, well, what does it matter? He was just another one of them, which makes no sense now. Like them
is
baseball players.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Wait,
John's
wait,
original
Mike?
script was actually better than what turned out. Now, that movie came out on VHS, right? It was during the VHS heyday, right?
Yep.
And then it disappeared, right? It was a while before DVDs came out. And when DVDs did come out, Zombie Nightmare was nowhere to be found on a DVD. He found a box of VHSs that he hadn't seen before, and Zombie Nightmare was in there. And so he watched it and he was like, this is perfect. And and I guess at that point it had become public domain, so they were able to use it without having to acquire the rights to it. So they cut it down. They cut out all the gore. Like the whole scene where Sean Levy gets killed is completely snipped out. And, you know, some of the other more bloody sequences were cut from it for just to make it, you know, MST friendly. But what they did without realizing it was they saved that movie from obscurity, because that movie never would have been put on DVD or Blu-ray or anything like that. It would have just disappeared into the miasma of the world, and no one would ever have seen it again. So what happened was they made it a premiere of their season, and Adam West would host the Turkey Day marathons. And so it was the premiere of their new season, and that was the first movie they showed. And I remember that night, it was really funny when they showed teasers for it on Comedy Central. And they would show, here's what's coming up, you know, here's what's coming up on Mystery Science Theater. And they'd show these flashes. And I recognized the Pee-wee zombie, the big zombie. Because when he's lying on the ground and his head is shaking and there's smoke coming out of his eyes and mouth and everything like that. And my jaw dropped open. I was like, oh my God. I ran to the phone and I called John Fasano up, right? And it rings, and he picks up and he goes, I know, Zombie Nightmare, I know, right? He didn't even say hello. He knew it was me, right? And so we were so freaked out and a little terrified. Because, you know, I'd been watching Mystery Science Theater and I knew that was just like, they're going to skin me alive. Oh my God.
You know what they do and how they get down.
And so that night, the night it premiered, I just remember I had this just jug of wine and I just was sitting there and I was like biting my fingernails and you know, in the end, they had bigger fish to fry than me. Actually, I mean, Adam was obviously a target, and you know the crazy voodoo woman, and there's just so much to dig out of there, or dig at there. And so they were mostly kind to me. There were some very funny lines about me being the 12-year who put the 12-year-old in front of in charge of the investigation and so forth. But I ended up laughing. The whole evening. And then what was really interesting is a few months later, I got a call from an old friend, Debbie. It was one of my best friends back in the day. She was with me on set of King of Comedy, actually, but she worked for a cable station in San Antonio, in Texas. And she said that Comedy Central was coming to San Antonio and they were going to be showing, they're doing a test basically, and showing Mystery Science Theater episodes on a big screen in a theater to see how it would play. And it turns out they picked Zombie Nightmare as the movie that they were going to show. So Debbie calls me up and she said, you know, you should come down. You should come down and be here for it. And Comedy Central actually then contacted me and they were like, how would you like to, you know, we'll fly you there and we'll, you know, put you up and everything like that. And if you'll make an appearance there at the theater that night. And yeah, sure. It would be fun. As it turns out, they sold out so quickly that they ended up taking a second theater, and that filled up. And the audience roared with laughter through the whole thing. I made just a little hello speech and so forth and signed some autographs afterward, but the test worked. And Comedy Central then from there, I think, you know, I think that's how This Island Earth became Mystery Science Theater, the movie. I'm not absolutely positive of that, but it seemed like that's the timing was about right there. I could be wrong. But it just proved that how popular the show was and how maybe they could reach beyond the small screen. I know they didn't make another movie after that, but the show continued and up until recently was back again with Jonah Ray.
Right.
You did some documentaries as well, and it was under Benevolent Monster Productions.
Yeah. Benevolent Monster. Yeah, that was the company I partnered with Trish Geiger.
First project was Beast Wishes, The Fantastic World of Bob and Kathy Burns.
Yeah.
And that went on to win a bunch of documentary awards. And you also did a follow-up documentary about King Kong called Long Live the King. That also won a bunch of documentary festival awards. So knowing the overall process of putting together a documentary and knowing that it's a lot of work, what was the process of putting all of those together?
Funny thing about that was that I didn't know anything about making a documentary, right? It kind of came about because I had acted in a movie with Trish called The Lost Skeleton Returns Again, which was my return to acting after many, many years, right? And that was directed by Larry Blemeyer. And Trish then produced Larry's next movie, which was called Dark and Stormy Night. And both of those are comedies. And I wasn't in Dark and Stormy Night, but I was the still photographer on set and just sort of helped out whatever I needed to, because Larry had actually cast that movie before we became friends. So we did Dark and Stormy Night, and there's a sequence in Dark and Stormy Night where we brought in a gorilla, not a real gorilla. We brought in my friend Bob Burns, who has made a career of playing a gorilla. So he has a gorilla suit. And so when shows like Here's Lucy and the original Ghostbusters show with Larry Storch and Forrest Tucker, they needed a gorilla. Well, Bob was one of the go-to guys to be a gorilla. So Larry had put on the gorilla suit and do a cameo, basically, in Dark and Stormy Night. So he was there for a day or two, and everybody got their picture taken with Bob in the gorilla suit. And Bob, of course, loved every minute of it because he's a big child. Trish then wanted to make the behind the scenes stuff for the release of the DVD of Dark and Stormy, right? And so like I had been filming a lot of the cast interviews and so forth. And so she knew I was friends with Bob Burns, and we didn't interview him when he was on the set. So Trish asked me if maybe the two of us could go over to Bob's house and do a quick little interview that she could put on the DVD. So we went there and we did a fun little 10, 15-minute interview where I interviewed Bob on camera in his collection. And so as it turns out, that interview didn't make it onto the DVD of Dark and Stormy Night. But Trish and I had been talking about starting a production company and everything like that. And we're like, what do we do? And we were looking at this footage of this interview with Bob Burns, and basically Trish was like, we should just make a full movie. And we started thinking about it. And we went to a party one night at my friend David Scow's house, and we met this guy there named Andrew Cash. They had just released a documentary that Andrew had edited called Never Sleep Again, which is all about all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. And so we're talking to Andrew, and we told Andrew, we said, we're thinking maybe we might do a documentary about Bob Burns and his collection and his basement and his Halloween shows and his gorilla outfit and all that kind of stuff. And Andrew's right there. He was just, I will edit that movie for a very, very low amount for an editor of his skill. And so that night, Trish and I were like, let's do it. And now Bob and Kathy didn't believe it. Like they were like, why do you want to make a documentary about us? Like Bob called me crazy every single day, but we had people come out of the woodworks to help us. Like, the Kickstarter went really well, right, very quickly. And then we had people offering up like, Rick Baker and Tom Woodruff at ADI, and all these people were offering up space to film at, camera equipment, whatever. And so we, without ever having really made a documentary before, Trish had some experience, but I had none. But I knew I could produce it we started making it, and everybody that we asked to appear in it, right away, Rick Baker, John Landis, Joe Dante, Greg Nicotero, everybody lined up to be in it. And it was lovely. It was just marvelous to watch.
Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have one of the most inspiring guests ever, who is the writer, producer, director, actor, and animator, Frank Dietz. This is the Lightning Hour. Let's enjoy some of your work.
Coffee for Mr. Sourpants. How can you let him treat you this way?
It's a little thing called marriage, Mr. Papin. It's pretty wonderful. You should try it sometime.
Maybe I just haven't found the right girl yet.
Maybe she hasn't come along yet.
Maybe she already has, but doesn't know it.
Maybe she does, but doesn't know she does.
Maybe she does know she does, but just won't admit it.
Maybe she won't admit it, but doesn't know she won't admit it.
Maybe she doesn't know she won't admit that she doesn't know that,
You so much as look at my wife again, and I swear I'll eat your hands.
You do, and you'll have some company.
Yeah, and and plus, when you have such a deep knowledge and love for movies and for cult classics, it can lead to many things. Like it led to your involvement with Scripts Gone Wild, bringing a new angle to it and a new job for you. And it's a perfect match, right? Scripts Gone Wild, created by Billy Ray Bruton, is a series of readings by actors of classic films for various charities. Rico and I have been a part of the reading series as actors. We're proud to say that. And you have both hosted and acted in some of the shows, but you've also brought your vast knowledge of films to it and have recently added classic TV shows to the weekly lineup. So what do you love the most about Scripts Gone Wild, and what can we expect from your involvement in the future?
They had been doing it for almost a year, I guess, and I hadn't heard anything about it. It was really quite a well-kept secret, and our mutual friend Jennifer was the one who told me about it, because I had been talking to her about possibly doing Zombie Nightmare the way Dana Gould does Plan 9 from Outer Space, where he takes the script and he gets a bunch of comedians and does a reading of it. I didn't know about Scripts Gone Wild, and Jennifer Lynn Warren was talking with me about how maybe we could do Zombie Nightmare that way, and it would be fun to do. So she invited me to go and see one of them. First one I went to was Roadhouse, and they had Joel McHale as the headliner. And I met Billy Ray that night, and I just loved the idea. It was very fun. People were having a blast, drinking, messing up, but I also really loved the idea that it was all for charity. And so that very night, I said to Billy Ray, having just met him, I was like, I was in this movie called Zombie Nightmare. And he was like, sure, absolutely. So then he invited me to do the next show they did. And that was the first one I did. And I think it was either Gremlins or Poltergeist. And I did it and had a blast. It was so much fun. So then basically came time. I was like, let's do Zombie Nightmare for the following year. And what I did was I wanted to make sure that I stacked the deck. And so I went to some of my more famous friends. I put together a really strong cast for it. And so Billy had me then host it. So I rewrote the script somewhat to make it more MST friendly. I didn't use any of the same jokes that Frank and Trace used. I wrote new ones and I inserted them into the stage directions. It was a laugh riot. That night, we raised a lot of money at the Children's Hospital. Shriners, yeah. I had been donating to Shriners on my own for a long time. So we ended up, through some angels, some people who threw in a bunch of money, we made something like $3,500 that night that we were able to send over to them, which was very gratifying. And it was a nice way for me to also honor John Fasano, who was a childhood friend. He wrote Zombie Nightmare, and we made those 4 horror movies in Canada together. And John had passed away only a year or two before that, I think maybe only a year before. So that was nice. We drank a toast to John at the end of it when we were done with the script. But it was so much fun. And from there, now I had hosted one. So Billy Ray was just like, well, what else would you like to host? So since then I did Zombie Nightmare, I did Beetlejuice, do TV shows. The first one we did was we did 2 episodes of Star Trek, of the original Star Trek. And then we did the Twilight Zone. Oh, Batman. We did, that's the other one I hosted. Yeah. The 1966 Batman movie. How many have you done, Rico?
I think up until maybe about a month ago, I've done the most. I haven't done as many since, so I think some people may have surpassed me, but I was the winner.
And it just keeps growing. It's funny because it has inspired other people to do similar things. I know that tomorrow night, Tom Holland, who is a dear friend of mine, he's the writer-director of Fright Night. He has put together an amazing reading of Fright Night. Most of the original cast, Chris Sarandon and Amanda Bierce and William Ragsdale. And on top of that, Mark Hamill and Ben McKenzie.
Nice.
That's going to be, and they're not drinking. They're charging for it, but the money is going to go to charity.
Oh, I just wanted to ask you what's ahead of us. What scripts are you planning to?
Okay. Next one I'm going to do is at the end of December. We're going to do the Poseidon Adventure. I think I'm going to have to cut down severely to get through it in less than 4.5 hours. We're going to be doing some very interesting things in the next year. And that is, aside from doing big popular movies, like I know I'm going to be hosting The Wrath of Khan, Star Trek The Wrath of Khan in March. And but what's really going to be fun for me is we started branching into doing not just existing movies that are popular crowds, but doing some original works, some original screenplays that have not been produced. One of the ones that we're planning on doing in April, but the very first full-length screenplay that I wrote that got any kind of attention was called Return of the Gargoyle. And that was the script that William Asher read. William Asher is the legendary producer and director of I Love Lucy, and he created Bewitched and so forth. And he read my script, Return of the Gargoyle, when nobody else would. And he encouraged me to keep writing because he thought it was very, very good. And from that script, I also got my first manager. We used it as my writing sample to get me other work, and it did. It got me many other work. But that script itself that got me all this other work and got me my manager never got made. And I've always loved it. It's really fun. And so now we're going to do it as a Script's Gone Wild and get to see how it plays. And I think it'll be really fun. It's a fun script. It's about an actor who used to play a superhero on television back in the day, and it was a campy show. You could probably guess what I was basing it on, kind of. And now it's many years later, and he's kind of washed up, and he's divorced, and he's living alone, and his life is sort of miserable. And a new version of that character, the Gargoyle, comes out as a big theatrical movie, a big high-tech movie. And he snaps and he starts putting on his old costume and going out and actually trying to fight crime. But he's terrible at it. And he keeps getting into trouble. He keeps going to his ex-wife, who's a doctor, who's essentially his Alfred. So even though she's telling him you got to stop doing this, she's still patching him up and so forth. And he ends up going up against a major mob boss in the city. And so it's a comedy, but just a lot of fun characters in it. And I've always loved it. I was always bummed that, it was never one that made it into production, but at least now we'll get to have some fun with it. And I now got to find the right cast, right?
Well, it's exciting that it's going to get made. I'm excited to watch it when it comes out. So let's turn to the lightning round, which is where we ask our guests the toughest questions. Are you ready, Frank?
I'm ready.
All right, Frank. Now, if you could, what exotic animal would you love to have as a pet and why?
What do you think? Of course, an alligator.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right.
An alligator. I refer to myself as an alligator enthusiast.
Alligatorologist, maybe even an alligatorologist.
That's a new word. We could make that a word too.
Yeah. You're an expert in all things alligator.
I made up the word expositional, which I use all the time. Yeah, alligators have fascinated me. Earliest memory I have of drawing anything was in my preschool class where they gave us crayons and told us to draw something. And I remember I drew an alligator. Been fascinated with them, and alligators and crocodiles in general, and shared a very, very a great experience with Rico there 2 years ago, where we. Wait, what's he bringing?
Well, I don't know if you remember, but you gifted.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah. That's they call him TikTok from Peter Pan, the Disney movie.
Sorry, the ring light kind of interfering, but
Yeah.
it's a Frank Dietz.
Wow, I forgot you had that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, that's important because Rico and I had a wonderful shared experience of taking alligator wrestling classes almost 2 years ago now. Alligator farm in Colorado, and it was amazing. They started us out just handling the juvenile alligators, only about this big, and you could get in this tank. You had to pick them up yourself and hold them, and Rico also picked up an alligator snapping turtle that took his nose off.
Yeah.
And
nose off. The other alligator scratched my chest.
That's
and
right.
It was weird because I kind of felt that pretty much the whole day. And there was, the running joke of kind of the equivalent of Peter Parker getting bit by a spider.
Yeah. You were only one radiation leak away from being a supervillain or
Right.
Oh my God.
So, but then they had us walk in different ponds of alligators of different sizes, and we would have to go to each pond and grab an alligator, pull it out of the pond and grapple it and hold it in place. Sometimes so that they could treat any kind of wound that the animal might have. The alligators kept getting bigger, as we did, right? And the first one was only like 3.5 feet, maybe. The second pond, it was a 6.5 foot alligator. The last alligator that we handled was a 9-foot alligator that we didn't have to drag out ourselves because that's too big. But while I was holding that 9-foot alligator, she had a wound on her back leg. And so they had a syringe with medication, and they treated it while I was holding her. So it isn't just about photo ops and so forth. It does help maintain these animals who are all rescues, which is kind of crazy.
And it's a hot springs at the farm in Colorado, where at the time when we went, it was snowing.
Snow on the ground, yeah. And everybody goes, "What are alligators doing in the snow?" And it's because it doesn't bother them because the ground and the water that they're in is like 82 degrees all year round. So yeah, it was a remarkable experience and one I'll never forget. And I was very happy to do it with my good friend Rico.
What has been your favorite quarantine dish?
I've been making pizzas, which I really hadn't done before. So I got a pizza stone. I love to cook, by the way. I cook a lot. Yeah, if anyone who follows me on Instagram probably sees my culinary concoctions quite often. But
you and Lee during the pandemic. Oh my God.
Yeah, I love to cook.
So Frank, how can people find you on social media?
Okay, so I am on Facebook. As just my name is pretty easy to find. On Twitter, and I'm not on Twitter as much, although I'm trying to get back into it. There's only so many hours of the day I can spend on social media. I'd love to have one of those people who does it for me. It would be great. Maybe I'll hire my daughter just to handle all my social media. But on Twitter and on Instagram, I'm the Frank Dietz. And I have a website that I update every so often, whenever I can, which is sketchythingsart.com.
And everybody check out Frank's artwork because he's an amazing artist. I love it. Real quick, Frank, what's the book that you published?
About 4 years ago, I finally published basically a collection of all my kind of classic monster art. My brand is called Sketchy Things. My corporation is called Sketchy Things, Inc. And Sketchy Things refers to the name that I applied to my style of caricature. And so the book I put out is called Sketchy Things, The Art of Frank Dietz, and it's on Amazon. It has a foreword by Dana Gould and an introduction by Greg Nicotero. We're both very nice to say a few words about our friendships and why we all love this crazy stuff.
We have writer, producer, director, actor, animator, and alligator enthusiast Frank, who's with us today on the Lightning Hour. Buddy, It was great talking to you, and thanks so much for hanging out and just sharing your insight and your thoughts and just yourself with us, man.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Love you, buddy.
Love you too.
We loved having you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you so
guys.
much. This was the Lightning Hour. I'm your host, Sasha Kerbel.
I'm your host, Rachelle Henry.
And I'm your host, Rico E Anderson.
Please support us by giving this video a like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click that little bell sign so you'll get notification when we post new shows.
Follow us on social media to learn more about the Lightning Hour and us, your 3 hosts. You'll find links as well as more about our guests in the description below.
We encourage you to post your questions for us in the comments section, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll be answering them in future episodes. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next Friday, same time, same place. Have a great weekend.